Final Fantasy VI. This game is often held in high regard by many. It is considered the holy grail of Final Fantasies. But what truly makes this game important? Before I answer that question, there's an important clarification that I need to make in regards to my history with Final Fantasy. Up until this year, I've played every Final Fantasy except for Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy VI. Yes, I know that some of you may cringe knowing that I passed up such a revered classic, but Flame Shields aside, I thought it was time for me to play it. The Final Fantasy community is often divided on which Final Fantasy is considered the best. Each Final Fantasy caters to a particular type of RPG fan, and some of the entries in the series have gained more attention than others. It truly is fun to discuss, but before I dive deeper into this discussion, I want you all to take a deep breath. It's okay if our opinions differ, and quite honestly, that's the thrill of the discussion. Why is there an eternal struggle between FF6 and FF7? What about Final Fantasy IX? It has some of the most loyal fans. Final Fantasy VIII gets plenty of hate, and it gets plenty of love. Yet Final Fantasy IV doesn't seem to get a shred of hate. The point to all of this? Understanding the Final Fantasies before and after Final Fantasy VI is crucial to judging it. Obviously, I won't be holding Final Fantasy VI to the standards of modern day gaming, but it is important to compare the game to its sister and brother games. So with that being said, what makes this game so significant and unique? This game was the last Final Fantasy released on the Super Nintendo. The 5 before, while all impressive in their own ways, served as practice and refinement to create the perfect 2D Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VI took something from its predecessors and formed not only one of the best RPGs on the Super Nintendo, but one of the best games on the Super Nintendo. The game all takes place in a steampunk world currently at war with the advanced nation of the Empire. While Terra is primarily the main character, you often find yourself progressing through the game without her. With 14 permanent characters to choose from, and others that come and go during the story, you will often find yourself testing the waters and making the perfect party. You start the game out as Terra, accompanied by 2 soldiers of the Empire. To her misfortune, she's being controlled by them with some sort of mind slave device. And after encountering the Esper, gods and beings of magical power, that they've been searching for, the 2 soldiers are killed on the spot, and Terra's mind slave device was destroyed. Sadly, she's afflicted with amnesia and cannot remember anything of her past. After being saved by a supposed treasure hunter named Locke, they set out to discover her identity whilst battling the Empire. Terra meets plenty of characters along the way, but among the first are Edgar and Locke. They are particularly intrigued by her ability to cast magic, both of them stating that magic hasn't been seen in thousands of years. As this was noted, it becomes more and more apparent that Terra isn't human throughout the story. I'd argue that the cast of characters in this game is its biggest strength and weakness. Some of the characters never really get too fleshed out and serve as mere side characters. That is an inherent issue with storytelling in general. Naturally, I gravitated towards some of the main characters like Locke, the treasure hunter, Celeste, a general of the Empire imbued with the power of magic, Sabin, a young man who abandoned his royal succession in order to pursue martial arts, and Cyan, a personal favorite of mine, a noble knight who lost his family and home defending against the Empire. Terra herself is a half-breed, having a human for a mother and an Esper for a father. Espers, as stated before, are gods and beings of magical power, and while this is not immediately revealed, her parents' story is very tragic and touching. A quick side note, Sabin is OP. Despite my criticism towards the large cast of characters, it's actually very dynamic with the plot. You can feel the pressure and consequences of war throughout the world, and as a result, you gain many allies in your rebellion against the Empire. Emperor Gestel is the leader of the Empire, and he's chasing after the unique powers of the Espers. His 2 primary generals, Leo and Kefka, are tools to his goal. Again, despite the fact that some characters never really get fleshed out, Leo and Kefka are certainly among the most impressive. Leo is a noble, kind, and inspiring general of the Empire, and throughout the story it makes you wonder why he's fighting on their side at all, while Kefka is clearly a bit more on the deranged and untrustworthy side. I want to move further into Kefka's character and story, and considering that this game is over 20 years old, I think I have some breathing room without spoiling too much. There's definitely some magic with this villain in particular. In fact, a lot of Final Fantasy fans argue that he is the best villain in the entirety of the Final Fantasy series. Throughout the game, he got me to chuckle a bit with his childish antics, but at the same time, you as the player could tell that there's more boiling beneath the surface. Between his rants, temper tantrums, and willingness to hurt people, you really know that this guy is messed up. As you near the halfway point in the game, and during one of the most critical parts of Final Fantasy VI, Kefka betrays the Emperor. When I witnessed this scene, I'm still not sure even Kefka knew exactly what he was doing. After awakening the Warring Triad, whom are the gods that are responsible for the balance of the world, he moved the statues in an attempt to throw the world into chaos, and most notably, succeeded. Only a true maniac would have done what he did, and as a result of this, Kefka gains unimaginable powers to terrorize the world. From there on, our cast of characters were separated during the cataclysm of the planet. Continents were torn apart, and so was our party. A year passes by, and with the world in despair, you're left to pick up the pieces as Celeste. All the ensuing chaos after the Kefka battle had put her in a coma. It was up to her to find our party members again. It was truly striking to see the world in such disarray at first. Wind blows with haunting music once you finally return to the newer and darker world. The colors in the sky seem to spell a somber, depressing mood as you travel. And as you reassemble your team, some of the characters have continued to fight, and many have lost the will and refuse. It can really shock you when you see a character as strong as Strago becoming part of some Kefka cult. But once again, it's the thrill of the uphill ensuing battles that drive you further, to persevere and strike down Kefka. The game for the most part gives you a lot of decisions to make throughout the story. Whether it's the order of storytelling, creating your party, or customizing moves through your espers, you are constantly making choices that impact how you play the game. It's nice to know that your actions are impacting the gameplay and story. You don't have to get all the characters, you don't have to choose the perfect story path, or perform perfectly at the Opera House. The game's variety is a huge plus that a lot of games these days seem to be lacking. The combat is turn-based and very basic. Your turns are timed, so you don't have to forever decide to attack, cast a spell, or run. Each character brings an ability or particular strength to the fight. Terra has exceptional magic, Cyan has various sword arts depending on how long you delay his cast, Celeste can absorb magic damage through her runic ability, and Saber can utilize some devastating martial arts through button combos. A lot of the fun I had came from discovering or unlocking moves for Cyan or Sabin. I admittedly didn't experiment too much with certain characters beyond what's provided in the story arcs. I was able to stay in my comfort zone, which is nice. One of the strengths of the game is that you get a taste of each character, and it lets you decide if you want to use them or not. I do have to give credit to the Esper system, keeping things fresh and exciting. Obtaining them and discovering new spells by equipping them to party members can be very satisfying, not to mention the bonus stats that it gives as well. The game has a very classical Final Fantasy feel to it with its equipment. Raking in gold and spending it on some new badass weapons is always one of the best feelings in any FF. Believe me when I say this, I know Final Fantasy is notorious for its random battles, but there were times in this game where I could not stand the frequency of them, especially later in the game when my characters no longer needed the experience. It could be infuriating trying to navigate a dungeon or cave only to be interrupted every 3 seconds. Thank the gods for Mog and his ability to prevent random encounters. But it definitely came a little bit too late in the game for my tastes. Another criticism I have of the game are the towns. Most of them lack any distinctive qualities. A game like Chrono Trigger certainly does a much better job at creating a colorful and inspired world. Sure, there was the Opera House, Narsh, Zozo, and even Edward's Castle, but a lot of the other areas are very forgettable. I do have to note Nobuo's raw talent for bringing places to life with his music. If not for him, the aforementioned areas would not have been as special to me. Final Fantasy VI is indeed special. It was released around the same time as Super Mario RPG and other classics such as Chrono Trigger. This was when Square was at its strongest. It was a powerhouse of RPGs and could not be stopped. If you are a fan of Final Fantasy or classic JRPGs, then I definitely recommend this game to you. It's an important part of Square's history and showcases what they were able to produce in a very short amount of time. Given that this game's development time was only 1 year, I'd say it's pretty damn impressive. If only the newer Final Fantasies could follow in its footsteps and not take years upon years to create. This game is Square's pinnacle of 2D Final Fantasies. The collective experience from the previous 5 really shows. Maybe I'd have to play through this game again to get a full appreciation of it, but I have a hard time putting this Final Fantasy in my top 3. If all else, at least play this game to appreciate the batshit craziness of Kefka. I give this game an 8 out of 10. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons and go check out some of our previous retro reviews. Some of you may know that I've been busy moving across the entire world to Japan, but that won't stop me from making these retro reviews. Jeff and I have a lot more content coming your way, so until next time, thanks for watching.